Assalamu alaikum. I hope your Ramadan is going well, enjoying your fasts and enjoying your time with family and friends. So, forgive is the root word, and that is the completion of an act. And forgiveness is the process. So, you're in the process of forgiving somebody, okay? And they are forgiven is obviously, it's a done deal. They're forgiven. But sometimes when we get to the, no, I've forgiven you, or I've forgiven myself, we haven't actually really got there. We might be in the forgive process where we know that there's an act that we want to complete. We might be in the forgiveness process, so we're still in process of trying to forgive, but we might be stuck there for quite a while. So we really need to think about forgiveness. Have we actually forgiven somebody, or are we in the process forgiving them or ourselves? Now, I want to look at the interpretation that the mayoclinic.org gives, and they've said it's an internal decision, which is a niyyah for us, an internal decision to let go of resentment and anger. And that's quite a good way of describing, because forgiveness is not just the act, it is dealing with the emotions behind the act, dealing with the pain behind the act. There's so much more to forgiveness. And that's why we should be in the process of forgiveness in a way that we're actually creating change within ourselves or within the person that we want to forgive. But sometimes things can be quite difficult, and I will go through the process of how we can actually deal with the process of forgiveness. So what do we need to consider? If we want to forgive somebody, or we should forgive somebody or ourselves, we should first think about how we respond and our reaction. And obviously, initially, it's going to be pain, hurt. But how do you respond to the task of forgiving or forgiveness? You first need to understand what happened, not our perception of the situation, whether that is somebody that's done something to us or that we've done something to somebody else. Our mind tends to go to a perception through the lens that we've always thought about, but sometimes we need to come out of that and look from another perspective at the situation. So just try and understand the situation. Sometimes we find that an individual doesn't actually understand what they're doing at the time when they have done the act, when they have hurt you. They didn't realize it was going to hurt you. And what we need to understand is we all have different levels of knowledge and different levels of awareness. So if that person was not in this state of awareness or did not have the knowledge to know the repercussions or the outcomes of the act that they were doing, then really can we hold them accountable to that extent? Instead, shouldn't we take this as an opportunity for that individual to learn and spend time with them to explain what they've done wrong and say that I'm happy to forgive? However, now it's up to you to make that change. And the same applies when we want to forgive ourselves. We must have these discussions with ourselves. And again, I will go into more detail. So we need to we need to ensure that we have an understanding of that situation and how that issue occurred. And then we need to accept, and that's very difficult for a lot of us, to get to a process where we fully accept what has happened and we can move on. Because accept doesn't just mean that I'm going to deal with this situation on my terms, and I'll tell them I've accepted it, but I've not, or I'm thinking about it. It is the final deal. You must accept. And it's only when you accept that then you can move on. That's the point where you then have remorse. Either you have remorse on an act that you've done to yourself, or that individual has remorse, okay? And in that, what we're doing is using the guilt that creates that state of remorse, okay? Use the guilt not as a tool to hurt ourselves further, to keep poking at other issues, whether it's to an individual that's done something to us or to ourselves. we need to be in a state of remorse, but in that state, we use the tool of guilt as a way to create change within through reflection, and also to be able to change our behaviors, whether that's outwardly or even inwardly, our reactions, our behaviors. This allows us to have more awareness and more knowledge about what's happening in certain situations and how we react to certain situations. Now, I can only give you very blanket statements at the moment because this is something that you need to watch and possibly re-watch and try and understand how it applies to you. So after we've gone through this state of remorse, then we get to a state where we can, once we've gained the knowledge that we need, we can get to a state of either resolve or restore. Okay, now, resolve is making amends. Okay, so what you're doing there is removing the burden from yourself. Because if you are not fully forgiving and not moving on, the burden is still within you, regardless whether that is because somebody else has done something or you have hurt yourself in some ways. Or you've hurt somebody as well, where you feel that you need to be forgiven. And sometimes you can't expect somebody else to be in a position to forgive, but you must be able to forgive yourself in that position, because forgiveness to yourself will allow you to make that change. So resolve allows you to amend that relationship. It may not be as wonderful as it was if it was a restoration of the relationship. And sometimes many relationships don't reach a state of being restored straight away, because when a trust is broken, when you're hurt, you do have a bit of a distance. However, be aware of that distance and try to minimize it. In fact, sometimes if you've really worked on yourself and the other individual has also worked on themselves, your relationship may be even better than just restore. It might be at another level. So that's what we should be aiming for within our relationships with others or within relationships with ourselves. Okay, and then we get to the renew or relieve. Now, you can decide which one works for you, whether you're able to relieve yourself completely or you're just going to move on from it in a very clear space, not holding on to the burdens that you had. And in this space of renew or relieve, it would be a space where you can learn more about yourself, learn more about the individual, learn more about situations that can occur. And through that, you can create growth within your life. And honestly, whether you have hurt somebody or somebody has hurt you, or you have hurt yourself in any way, growth is very important because we can always learn from the situation and we can always try and grow. So as you can see, forgiveness is, in a sense, a state where we need to accept unconditionally whether it was our behavior at the time, and then we think about changing our behavior, or whether it's accepting the situation. Okay, so there's a state of acceptance, a pure state of acceptance. Okay, and you need to be really true to yourself about this. You don't need to agree with the situation that happened. You don't need to agree with the way the person has harmed you. You don't need to agree with that person either. But you need to resolve this situation for yourself so that you can move on. Whether they move on, whether they change, is not up to you. You can't make that choice. That's their choice to make and their choice to live life. But you need to be free of any burden. At the end of the day, we know we're going to die. Do we really want to take all of this to our deathbed? Do we not want to go to Allah in a state where we feel clear, cleansed, and ready to take in more from the next life? So let's look at that in more detail when we're trying to create a state where we are accepting. Let's do it unconditionally, okay? And try and be more objective about the situation and not emotional. When you're doing your reflection, when you're thinking about the situation that occurred that created you hurt, that requires forgiveness, either for yourself or for the other. In that situation, make sure you look at it objectively and not emotionally. Again, emotions are very much linked to past experiences, and they're linked to our state, state at that time, our anger, and our perception. So we need to be objective and not emotional, okay? And we need to be free from the burden, like I said. So that means that we shouldn't really have any more ruminating thoughts. We shouldn't be living in the past anymore if we've done this process appropriately and accurately. We should be able to live in the now, okay? And even sometimes we become wishful about the future, about how relationships could be. We cannot go there because we cannot change things that are out of our control. But what we should be doing is living in the now. But then you'd say, well, it hurts. How am I supposed to forgive when this pain has not been resolved yet? I think in this state, you need to remove your pain from the process of forgiveness. They now have split into two processes: the process of dealing with pain and emotions and how we'll live with that, and the process of forgiveness. They're now two different things, okay? And they're two different journeys as well. Inshallah, the process of forgiveness will be a lot quicker. And I pray that the process of emotions and dealing with those are quick. However, sometimes they can require a bit of patience, okay? So you must take note, whether that's through journaling, whether that's through reflection, whether that's working with a therapist or a coach. Make sure that you've looked at the different emotions that you are experiencing and that you were processing at the time, and process those emotions in the present with the knowledge, understanding, empathy, and all the other things that we've spoken about so far, okay? And you can do that yourself. If you're stuck, like I said, find somebody to work with. Now, lastly, why do we need to forgive? Forget about the hereafter. Obviously, we want to go with a clean slate, and we don't want to take a burden with us, and we don't want to leave somebody else in a situation when we leave this world. So physically, it has an impact if we don't forgive. Research suggests that there are a lot of issues that we can face physiologically. And if we do forgive, we find that we have lower rates or lower risk of heart attacks. We have improved cholesterol levels. We have a better level of sleep, much more improved. And we see that on a night where we feel clear, cleansed, and we feel that we don't have any burdens within us, we sleep really well. Also, pain that's emotional manifests within our body in different places, in different situations, okay? And it can create inflammation and swelling. Just imagine how much of that can be reduced just by you forgiving somebody or forgiving yourself. You reduce your blood pressure, and anxiety and depression is very much significantly reduced as well. So let's try and find ways where we can be more at peace with ourselves. And to start with, we need to forgive ourselves. This is the month of Ramadan, where we have times in the month and throughout the month where we are asked by others to forgive them, and we offer forgiveness as well, without that person knowing. So why not take time out to make a dua for yourself? Make a dua that you are now forgiving yourself with an intention in the way of Allah. And that will be the first start of change, because psychologists say intention is the way to make change. Without intention, change cannot happen. So we've been given this in our hand, subhanallah. Let's make use of it. Inshallah, I pray that you all have a very healthy Ramadan, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, where you can release all your burdens and you can give yourself the time that is needed, whether that is through reflection, whether that is through reading the Quran and reflecting, whether that is listening to du'as and finding ways to reflect. And when you ask Allah for forgiveness, make sure you take time out for yourself to forgive yourself too. Wassalam.